It is 3 p.m. in New York, 8 in The Hague, and 4 on a Monday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Moon Gun-young. This is Arirang, Korea's only global network. Artillery fire was exchanged between the two Koreas earlier this Monday afternoon. Now, in the midst of live fire drills, a North Korean artillery shell landed south of the inter-Korean maritime border. The South Korean military responded by firing back across the northern limit line. For the latest and the details, let's go live to our correspondent Hwang Sung-hee at the News Center. Sung-hee, so what are we getting? What is the latest?
Kanyang, the exchange of fire between the two Koreas came to an end about 2 hours ago. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff says it all began at a little past noon on Monday when North Korea fired hundreds of artillery shells in waters north of the northern limit line. Several of those shells fell south of the NLL in South Korean waters near the border Baengnyeong Island. A spokesperson for the Joint Chiefs of Staff said the South Korean military shot around 50 artillery shells back across the NLL in response using K9 self-propelled howitzers. Now, residents of South Korea's border island were told to take cover in shelters. North Korea had notified South Korea of its plans to conduct live fire drills this morning, announcing they would carry out exercises in 7 West Sea border regions north of the NLL. It had not given a specific time for the planned exercises, but demanded that Seoul keep its vessels out of the training zone. Kanyang?
Now, however, many experts are viewing this as a provocation. How is the South Korean military now preparing for the event of perhaps another incident?
Well, South Korea's defense ministry took the unusual warning from its neighbor this morning as a hostile threat. Now, this is the first time in recent history that the North has conducted a live fire drill in all 7 West Sea border regions. It is also the first time that the North has informed the South of the exercises ahead of the time. Now, during a press briefing this morning, the Vice Defense Ministry spokesman had said South Korea will keep close watch for possible clashes as they believe the North is trying to raise tensions near the western maritime border. The South Korean military has activated crisis management operations and has deployed naval convoys near the NLL to cope with any contingencies. Officials in Seoul have been on high alert, and it's worth mentioning that this is not the first time the North has fired artillery shells in this direction. In 2010, North Korea launched artillery strikes on a South Korean border island, killing 4 people. Kanyang?
All right, thank you, Sung-hee, for that report. That was Arirang News' Hwang Sung-hee with the latest on North Korea's live fire drills, and we will have the updates for you as soon as the story develops. Meanwhile, Pyongyang's test firing of 2 mid-range ballistic missiles last week drew international condemnation, but that would pale in comparison to the response following a 4th nuclear test out of Pyongyang. The regime threatened as much on Sunday, but for now, Seoul says all is quiet, at least on the nuclear front in the north. Our Shin Se-min reports.
Despite Pyongyang's threat to carry out a 4th nuclear test, the South Korean government says there are no signs to indicate that one is in the works.
North Korea is capable of conducting nuclear or long-range missile tests at any time, but for now, there are no imminent signs of nuclear tests or missile launches.
Protesting a UN condemnation of its medium-range Nodong ballistic missile launches last week, North Korea raised tensions Sunday by threatening to conduct a new type of nuclear test. It was the regime's first mid-range missile launch in 4 years and followed a series of short-range rocket firings over the past 2 months.
We would not rule out a new form of nuclear test for bolstering our nuclear deterrence.
In response, Seoul's foreign ministry warned North Korea to keep in mind that it will pay the price if it neglects the grave demands from its neighbors and the international community and pushes ahead with another nuclear test. The United States also urged North Korea to refrain from disturbing regional peace and security, saying any nuclear test or ballistic missile launch are a grave violation of UN Security Council resolutions and that it will only further isolating Pyongyang. According to 38 North, a website run by the U.S.-Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins University, recent satellite imagery shows mountains north and south of North Korea's Punggye-ri test site have been excavated to complexes that could allow for multiple tests. Joel Witt, a former State Department official and editor of the 38 North website, said North Korea is capable of carrying out a test within 4 to 6 weeks once it decides to do so. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the largest amphibious landing drill on the Korean peninsula in 2 decades is currently underway on the nation's southeast coast, and you can be sure that North Korea is paying close attention from afar. They regard the annual exercises as a rehearsal for invasion. Our national defense correspondent Kim Hyun-bin is there, and he reports from Pohang.
U.S. and South Korean Marines blaze across the water to secure the shoreline and their positions on Korea's southeastern coast. The Marines are here for the joint South Korea-U.S. amphibious landing exercise, dubbed Double Dragon, which started on March 27th and runs through April 7th. As part of the annual Fall Eagle drills between the two allies.
Through this joint exercise, Korea and U.S. forces are working as one to suppress war with our might while enhancing our interoperability.
This is the largest amphibious landing drill in South Korea in 2 decades, with over 12,500 U.S. and South Korean forces taking part. The 3rd Marines Expeditionary Brigade from Okinawa is here, along with 22 Osprey multi-mission aircraft, 13 naval vessels, and others. The Expeditionary Brigade played an active role in the Iraq War, and if a conflict were to break out on the peninsula, they'll be among the first to arrive.
Both the people of South Korea and the citizens of the United States ought to rest assured that their military has taken their missions very serious, that we're training as hard as we can. We're trying to do this in the most economical fashion that we can.
The Double Dragon drill seeks to enhance interoperability and working relationships between the two militaries across a range of operations, from disaster relief to complex expeditionary operations.
North Korea has condemned the drills, calling them a rehearsal for an invasion. Some experts said given the level of anger, it is highly likely that Pyongyang will conduct a ballistic missile launch or a 4th nuclear test before the drill is over on April 7th. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News, Hwang.
Washington has reportedly given its first positive response toward delaying the transfer of wartime operational control to South Korea from the end of 2015. Well, the Korean Broadcasting System reported Monday that the U.S. may make its decision official during President Barack Obama's visit to Seoul next month. The report says the positive outlook stems from a constructive meeting between the two countries' top military officers in Washington earlier this month. However, South Korea's defense ministry declined to comment on this report. Seoul wants the transfer pushed back from the current scheduled date of December 2015, citing the ongoing and unpredictable threat posed by North Korea. South Korea and Japan are supposed to hold ministerial-level talks in April in a bid to improve ties strained over a number of historical issues. But there is rising speculation that the meeting might not take place at all, as the two sides cannot work out an agenda. Connie Kim reports.
Korea and Japan aren't seeing eye to eye on the agenda for ministerial-level talks scheduled for April, and new reports suggest they may not meet at all. A foreign ministry official from Seoul reaffirmed on Sunday that the discussions would focus solely on the women who were forced by the Japanese military to work as sex slaves during the Second World War. That runs counter to what a Japanese foreign ministry official told the press Friday. The official said the talks should not only center on the comfort woman issue, but also on other points of contention between the two countries. Chief Secretary Yoshihide Suga said Thursday that discussions should also include his government's claims over Korea-controlled Dokdo Island. If the two countries fail to sit down at the negotiating table in April, it's expected to have a further effect on bilateral relations. Tokyo proposed a ministerial-level talks to Seoul as a concession ahead of its trilateral summit with Korea and the United States last week. Korea's efforts to raise awareness of the comfort woman issue continues on an unofficial level. The House of Sharing, a shelter for former sex slaves, said it has invited Japan's First Lady Akie Abe for a visit. The proposal was made in mid-March during a meeting with Japanese diplomats. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now we have some welcome news on the economic front. Korea posted a current account surplus for the 24th straight month in February as trade gains widened and the service account deficit fell. Our economics correspondent Hwang Sung-hee has the details.
Korea's central bank said Monday that the nation posted a current account surplus of over $4.5 billion last month. That's up over $1 billion from January and more than double from February of last year. Exports of goods rose over 7% from the previous year to $48 billion, while imports edged up slightly more than 1% to $42.6 billion. When asked if the surplus was coming from the nation's sluggish domestic demand, officials at the central bank attributed subdued imports to stable global commodities prices. The deficit in the service account, which includes tourism and shipping, also fell, helping the nation log a current account surplus for the 24th straight month. It posted a deficit of around $1.5 billion last month, compared with a shortfall of nearly $2 billion in January. The current account data was released based on a new international standard. Under the new standard, last year's current account surplus widened to $79.8 billion, up around $9 billion from the previous data. The central bank said last year's surplus accounted for 6% of the nation's gross domestic product. The nation's current account surplus has been acting as a buffer for Korea since the U.S. Federal Reserve has been scaling back its massive bond-buying stimulus program. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Well, Korea's central bank says it is keeping a close watch of low inflation trends and will respond accordingly if necessary. In its monetary policy report Monday, the Bank of Korea said it would manage its monetary policy to support economic growth and work toward bringing consumer prices back into its inflation target band over both the mid and long term. Well, it forecasts that consumer prices will return to the target range of 2.5% to 3.5% as the effects of low oil and farm prices diminish. Consumer prices fell below the central bank's inflation target for the 21st straight month in February. Two Samsung Group companies are merging. The deal announced this Monday has Samsung SDI, the group's unit in charge of developing battery technologies, acquiring the group's textile firm Jail Industries. The merger will be finalized in July, and when that is done, Samsung SDI will be one of the conglomerate's biggest business units with market capitalization of 10 trillion won, that is roughly $9.3 billion, and assets worth $14 billion. Samsung SDI has been developing display and parts technologies with a new emphasis on batteries since the year 2002. Now, Jail Industries has been involved in the fashion, chemical, and electronic material industries since being founded back in 1954. In an eye-opening sign of how much the Korean economy relies on its two biggest companies, new data shows the combined revenue of Samsung Electronics and Hyundai Motor accounts for more than 1/5 of the country's total GDP. Well, figures from Korea's central bank and the nation's financial watchdog on Monday show the consolidated revenue of the two firms logged 316 trillion won last year, which is about $300 billion. Now, that is equivalent to 22% of Korea's nominal GDP, with Samsung Electronics accounting for 16% and Hyundai Motor 6%. The portion of their revenue to GDP has been on the rise from a combined 17% 4 years ago. And the two companies also top market capitalization. Put together, they represent a staggering 19% of the Korean bourse. The Korean government is working tirelessly to put President Park Geun-hye's deregulation plans in motion. Seoul's finance ministry is fast-tracking the procedure for getting a revised bill into the hands of lawmakers. Here's our Kwon So-ah with the details.
The government wants a quicker and more direct route towards deregulation, and they're doing all they can to make it happen. A high-level official at the Ministry of Strategy and Finance said Monday that the timing and speed at which deregulation takes place is important, and for that reason, the ministry is working with the Ministry of Justice and other related offices to speed up the process. Ministries are typically required 40 days prior notice that they will be proposing a revised bill, with another 20 days tacked on for screening by legislative bodies and the Regulatory Reform Committee. But the Finance Ministry is working to cut that 60-day time frame in half to 30. Similar deregulation plans were also been mentioned by the Transport Ministry last week when it announced that individuals and businesses will be allowed to transition commercial trucks into food trucks. This came less than a week after President Park pledged to reduce the volume of regulations by 20% of the current level by 2016. It's a plan of a 3-year economic innovation plan which intends to revitalize investment and ultimately create more jobs. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Well, Korea's listed companies are for the first time disclosing how much their top executives are getting paid, and this is because of a new law. For an in-depth look into this new law and its procedures, we have Dr. Kim Byung-ju, the head of KLMP Consulting, and our regular commentator live in the studio. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
So a busy day for the CEOs and executive. It is the last day of to meet the legal requirement for this disclosure of their pays.
Right, indeed. Last year, at the end of the November, a new law passed governing the overall capital market here in Korea, and that required these companies, listed companies, publicly traded companies, if they have executives who are getting paid more than 500 million won per year, they have to disclose their names and the amount of salaries that they're making. So based on this new change, companies have been thinking about how to go about it. Altogether, in theory, the publicly traded companies, we are talking about 2,500 companies, but that's only in theory. If you select companies that has those people who are getting paid more than 500 million won, we're talking about somewhere around 170 companies. And in terms of number of people, we are thinking about 530 or so executives here. So their pay level last year most of them will come out today. That's because today is the last day. According to the law says within 90 days of closing the business, meaning the last day of last year, these companies have to disclose this information, and today is the day. One of the reasons why these companies are all doing this today is they want to divert attention. If they release their data earlier than today, bits and pieces, there could be public focus on these companies too much, they could say. And they were saying, well, why don't we just release all this information as much as we can on the same day so that media cannot focus on each one with too much of attention. That was the calculation. And also another calculation was that, what do we do about these numbers, first of all? They have to release the facts, but there is a concern if these numbers are too small, the companies don't look in competition or in comparison with other companies. But then again, if these numbers are too big, of course, politically, it's not good. So this catch-22 situation, but they have to do it one way or another, and today is the day, and that's why we're getting all these numbers coming out as we speak. At this moment.
Right, you're absolutely correct. I mean, we are getting numbers out, and reportedly there are 10 executives in Korea who are getting these super duper salaries of more than 10 billion won.
Right.
So that's roughly 10 million US dollars.
Right.
And apparently what we're getting right now is that number one is taken by SK's Choi Tae-won. And last year he got paid 30 billion won.
Okay.
So that's
not a small amount of money.
That is not a small amount of money at all.
Right, indeed.
Something ordinary average Koreans may never see in their lifetime. time, most likely.
The thing is, one question about Choi Tae-won's case is that he's been spending a lot of time coming in and out of jail, and there is that concern. While he was not really working on spending his time on company matters, does he deserve that much of pay? That was the argument that has been potentially being raised by the critics. And now, since we have the numbers, I'm sure we'll get to hear more about those. The thing is, actually, one controversial point about this is that all these names are not going to be known to us, or amounts will be known to us among the real big shots in the Korean business community, because only about half of Korea's listed companies actually list their true so-called controlling owners as the registered business board member. So we are saying we will miss about half of them indeed. The numbers of whom we want to know about. And so far, they're saying like Cho Young-jin, for instance. Well, let's start with Lee Gun-hee. We will not get to learn the number of amount of money he was getting from his Samsung companies last year, because he's not listed as registered board member. Same goes to Lee Jae-young, his son, and his daughter Lee Se-yeon also is not listed. And Cho Young-jin, for instance, head of Shinsegae Group, he withdrew from the list last year, perhaps with the knowledge that this law is coming, some people are saying. And his mother, Lee Myung-hee, also did the same as well. So there are all these big names missing. But the names that are included, such as Choi Tae-won of SK, and then Lee Jae-hyun of CJ Group, who also was coming in and out of jail, who could not spend much time on business matters, also will have their number of salaries about them, and there will be controversy all being raised about all these.
Right. The only names that I'm getting from these reports and rush reports that I'm getting right now as we speak are from Samsung, Kwon Ho-hyun and Shin Jong-kyun and Yoon Boo-gun, and they apparently have been getting paid annually, nearly 10 billion won.
That's not a small amount of money, I suppose.
Right.
Actually, those names, Shin Jong-kyun is the head of mobile business in Samsung Electronics, so he was being expected as one of the best paid, hired executive in Korean business community, other than so-called Jebel owners here. And also, Kwon Ho-hyun was another name, head of the parts supply, digital parts supply business within Samsung Electronics, was another one whose name was being mentioned. Yoon Boo-gun is head of consumer electronics. And the Lee Sang-hoon was another name who's in charge of strategic planning within Samsung Electronics. Those Big Four, they said before this release that you're talking about, we knew the total number for this Big Four, which was about $34 billion US. So on average, it was about 8.4 billion. Now we're getting these real big numbers, which not be all given equally to those Big Four. But the thing is, today we will get to learn how much Jung Mong-gu, head of Hyundai Motor, got paid last year. That's a real big news. And his son, Jung Hui-sun, head of Kiha, his pay level will get to learn. And also LG head Gu Bon-moo and his brother Gu Bon-jun, and also Samsung's Lee Bu-jin, the daughter of Lee Gun-hee, who is actually heading Hotel Shilla business. We will get to learn how much she got paid. So we have a lot of interesting numbers and interesting names that we will continue to learn before the end of the day.
Right. I mean, I can tell you right now that Jung Mong-gu, the head of Hyundai,
how much?
Group, he is getting paid somewhere around 14 billion to 15 billion won, and that's what we're getting. And what's surprising right now is that, following SK's Choi Tae-won, the second in place in terms of their salary rankings is the head of Pyongan L&C, which is famous for its outdoor brand Nepa. And he is Kim Hyung-seok, former, I suppose, a vice president of that country, and he took a staggering 20.1 million.
I see.
Or billion. 20 billion won. Yes. So he came in second place. So that's quite a lot of money we are seeing. Now, obviously, we need further improvements of this disclosure rule, as we aren't getting the major ones like Lee Gun-hee, for instance.
Exactly.
What do we see ahead?
We will need a lot of debate, and perhaps we will need several rounds of discussion even here in this program coming up. And you mentioned that Jung Mong-gu, I think we need to still confirm it. You told me that he got paid about 40-something billion, right?
14.
14. Okay, keep that in mind. In the United States, the top top 10 best paid executives got paid about 100 billion won in terms of Korean currency last year. So it's like there's a big gap between how much they get paid in the United States and here. But still, here in Korea, there will be continuing debate about this, and we will check it out because this is a very important issue here as we talk about economic polarization, capitalism, where the future of capitalism lies and all that. So a lot of mouths and a lot of brains and heads will be all poured into this debate, and we'll get to learn more of those, and we will share those with our viewers.
Right, apparently, and this is part of Park administration's drive for a more transparent, I suppose, economic structure and societal structure.
Right.
So we will be looking forward to the major changes that are going to be made to this law and made into law, and what we'll be seeing, what improvements we'll be seeing next year.
Absolutely.
All right, Dr. Kim Young-ju, thank you so much for today. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
And that's all from me at this hour. Thank you for watching. Do join me again at 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Edition at 6.